When this building got set up, part of the design with the Schermer building included having a greenhouse. And so this was constructed, to be honest, it wasn't actually designed by someone who really had a lot of expertise in greenhouse design. So we've had to kind of do some work to make this functional. And one of our big problems is we need more ventilation. Insulation in the winter and ventilation this time of year. We're able to grow about 2,000 trees a year in here. So we're growing primarily Douglas fir. So most of these trays, these taller trees, these are all Douglas fir. But then we're also growing western white pine, which is what these are. These are starting to develop their mature foliage. So all trees, when that seedling first comes out of the soil, they all have what we call juvenile leaves, or you might hear them called cotyledons. And then they'll start to develop their mature foliage. And white pine is a 5-needle pine growing in these fascicles. And then we also have Sitka spruce growing, and that'd be these trees. So they're very similar to the fir, shorter needle, a little more blue color. These will get real pokey as they mature. And those are really the 3 species that we're growing in here right now. And one of the cool things with this is that all of this seed was also collected by our students. So we're not buying this seed. We're actually collecting all of this from the Satsop forest. So this process for us starts in September, actually before classes begin. We'll get a couple students together and we'll go select seed trees, and we actually go ahead and fall them so that we can get to the top where the cones are. We'll take those cones, you have to then dry the cone, you shake the seed out, and then the seed has to be stored, and so we put them into vacuum sealed bags and we store that seed. The seeds that we're going to be planting then, they have to go through a certain process, the natural cycle of a winter for these seeds. So they have to have a certain number of days below 40 degrees in order for them to basically chemically be ready to sprout. With the white pine, we also have to scarify the seed. So we actually have to take a razor blade and scarify it because the outer seed coating is very tough. Naturally, that would be done by, say, squirrels or mice chewing on that seed, or by chemical weathering, or even fire can release that seed. But in a greenhouse setting like this, we have to artificially create some of those natural processes in order to get good germination. So then in our advanced silviculture class in the fall, the students fill all the planting trays, and then they sow all the seeds. We'll typically sow 2 seeds in each cell because you never get 100% germination. And then we're able to take some of the extra ones, the cells where we get multiple seedlings coming up, and we'll move them around and transplant them so that every single cell in every tray has a good healthy tree in it. That's the goal. So these trees got sown back in November, so it's been almost 6 months since we originally sowed them, and we're getting close to the end of their time here in the greenhouse because as the weather continues to warm, and I mentioned we have some ventilation problems up here, once we start getting consistent daily temperatures over 80 degrees, this greenhouse will be hitting 120. It's gotten hot enough in here before that plastic trays started melting, so we have to get these things out of here before it gets too hot for them. So we'll be taking all of these seedlings out to Satsop, and we're going to put them in what we call a transfer house. So it's kind of like an open, it's sort of built like a greenhouse, but it's open to the natural air. And they'll stay out there at Satsop where they're still getting a regular water regimen, but they're getting acclimatized to the natural temperatures. And they'll stay in there until December this year, and then it'll be during winter break that they get planted. So these trees are going to get planted around Christmas time this year. So it takes about a full year to go from when we plant the seed to actually putting this seedling in the ground. And all the planting is done by students as well. We hire a couple of our students to help us over winter break doing all the planting out on the school forest. And this is filling all of our need for Douglas fir. Where we're planting into stands that we've conducted timber harvests on our school forest. And we only do about a 4 or 5 acre harvest each year. And we're doing what we call interplanting because we do thinning based harvests. So we're maybe only putting in 100 to 200 seedlings per acre. So with a capacity of being able to grow about 2,000 seedlings, we're able to fill almost all of our planting needs. We are still buying in from other nurseries, Western red cedar. Just like I said, that's something we haven't quite figured out how to grow ourselves yet, but that's kind of the next thing we'd like to learn. So it's cool. We're able to take students through the whole cycle of collecting seeds, sowing the seed, tending to the seedlings, there's a lot of work that goes into just even getting them to this stage, thinning them out and making sure they don't have double tops. And then the students, you know, get to finish that cycle by putting the trees in the ground. Yeah, it's one of the parts of our program that we're pretty proud of, that we're able to do this full cycle process like this and get students involved in every single step of that nursery practice. So it's a little rudimentary, but we make it work. You know, we have to supplement with growing lights because of the environment we're in. We just don't get enough reliable sunshine, especially through the winter months. So December, January, February, if we didn't have grow lights in here and if we didn't have heaters going, we would never be able to get this to happen. So yeah, that's one of our challenges, but it's a fun challenge. It's a rewarding challenge. So, you know, cost wise, the only thing we're spending on this each year is just the cost of new growing media. We don't really think of it as soil because we want it to be a neutral growing media for these seedlings. We don't want other plant seeds potentially being in it, but the trays we're able to reuse every year. We get pretty good life out of these. We can get at least 5 or 6 years usually out of each of these trays, and so buying, you know, a new set of trays is not very expensive. So yeah, our only real cost is the media itself, I suppose the fertilizer, and a little bit of time and elbow grease, but other than that, we're essentially able to produce all of our own trees. Oh, that is our wintertime insulation. So, you know, December, January, these are just single wall windows here, and so they don't have any insulating barrier. So during the wintertime, in order to get seeds to germinate, you generally have to have soil temperatures for conifer seedlings exceeding 45 degrees. If it's going below 45 degrees, they're just not going to germinate. So that's kind of like the bare minimum. We're really trying to hold them closer to about 70 degrees in here. The warmer it is, the better chance they have of success. So in the wintertime, in order to insulate, the best thing we could come up with was bubble wrap. So we duct tape bubble wrapped everything, and it lasts just long enough to keep everything insulated, and with a couple of heaters in here, and then we use electric heating pads underneath the trays. You know, a lot of the stuff we're using here, you can buy this stuff on Amazon. It's not like special products or anything, but we use that as well just to make sure the soil temperature is appropriate. So at this point in the year, honestly, we're probably at a point where we could take this down, but then, you know, we're still getting some of our nighttime temperatures right now, even at the end of April, are still dipping into the 30s. And if the temperature in here were to fall into that 30-degree range, it wouldn't necessarily kill these trees, but it could give them enough of a shock that they might do something we don't want, like they could start setting buds. We don't want them to set a bud yet. It's not the right time. These trees should not be setting a bud naturally until October, September, sometime around there. So later in the fall, naturally growing outside, and this is why we got to get them in that transplant house, that's when the bud will be set. And that bud is important because that's what's going to overwinter. And then in the following spring, the bud will break and new growth will happen. But if that bud is set too early, it can become damaged during summer droughts, and then we won't get any good growth the following year. It won't necessarily kill the tree, but it's going to set it back a couple of years. So it's really important that we try to mimic the natural environment as much as possible. The timing of certain events and cooling events are biological triggers for a lot of important processes. So no, the watering's all automatic. So we have this automatic misting system. It's all controlled through a box over there on the wall. So during the fall quarter, we have students up here pretty regularly because that's when there's a lot of stuff going on. We need the extra hands. And so that's filling trays and getting everything sown. And we have them involved in, as the seeds first start coming up, we have the students helping us with thinning out the cells and making sure we got one seed per cell that's growing. Once we get to this part of the year, we sometimes have a work study student working with us that will have come do some of this work. But, you know, honestly, at this point in the year, I only need to come up here maybe once a week, just kind of make sure everything's still going good. But for the most part, everything's automatic. The lights are all on an automatic timer. The heating system is also on an automatic timer. We have temperature probes, just kind of at, you know, basically at the level where the roots are. That's where it really matters. I don't care as much about what the temperature is up here. I care about where the temperature is in the soil where the roots are. Oh, look at that. There's another one coming up. With these white pine, we get a lot of late seeds coming up. And so that's a seed that just barely germinated. This is the exact right time to transplant it. Before it starts to develop any fine roots, you can pull that out pretty easy. And I think at this point we've filled every cell, so I don't know if I have don't know if I have a place to put this one. That's okay. We always grow more seedlings than we actually need. You have to. When we collect those seed cones, we get so much seed from that our advanced silviculture course, all of our bachelor's curriculum in the forestry program, it's on a 2-year cycle. So the students getting involved in, the planting and the thinning and all that, that's only every other year. In the off years, that's where we rely a little more on some of our work study students. Or, sometimes we just grab someone in the hallway and say, hey, you want to come help us? But we're able to collect enough seed that on the years that we don't have the advanced silviculture class running, we have plenty of extra. We've got maybe 20,000 extra dug fir seeds right now in freezer storage. They'll stay viable like that for decades. You can store seed for a long time if you store it correctly and freeze it. So truthfully, we probably don't need to harvest seed for quite a while, but that's all part of the learning process of harvesting the seed and collecting it from cones, so we're going to continue doing it. Yeah, so this, on the other side here, there's a lot of stuff we have to say. I mean, it's things like, this is just a giant bag of peat moss. The soil media we're growing in, it's not like we just go get a bag of Miracle-Gro. We're actually mixing it ourselves, so we're taking, peat, and, it kind of comes in like a product like this, where it's all broken up, and then we're adding in a lot of other things to it, and the main thing we're adding is perlite. So you've probably seen, like, you go, if you buy like that, that Miracle-Gro, or you go buy a plant from the hardware store, it's got all this white stuff in it. It's almost like styrofoam. This is called perlite. And really all this is, it's just helping increase water retention. So this is super absorbent. That peat moss is super absorbent. If we use natural soil in a greenhouse setting like this, we would get all sorts of things we don't want growing. So we're mixing in the perlite and the peat moss and a little bit of sand to help everything drain. But basically this is like our prep room. So we got all of our extra trays in here, tons of extra pieces for the watering system for when something breaks, cooling fans. These are our seedling heating mats that we plug in. We've had quite a few discussions about potentially, setting this side of the greenhouse up and growing in here. We don't really have a need for it, which is part of why we haven't done it, because we're already growing enough trees for what we need for the forestry program. And so since we have so much need for storage, for us it's just work that we can use that. We did briefly have a little, we had bought a little shed, one of those little kit sheds from Home Depot, and we had it up on the roof, and, well, it blew away in a windstorm. So if we ever did turn this side of the greenhouse into a functioning growing space, we'd probably have to build some kind of storage building up here in order to store all this material, because we're filling that room right now. It's a small space, but we're pretty proud of what we're able to do with it. It gives us an opportunity that's pretty unique. I went to the University of Idaho when I was studying forestry myself, and I worked at a production nursery that the university owns. But that's a completely separate facility that's off campus. And, we're growing 2,000 trees here. At the Pitkin Nursery at Idaho, we were growing 400,000. And even that really in the big picture is small. You talk about like industrial nurseries, and the one that sticks in my mind is Weyerhaeuser's Bare Root Nursery in Aurora. They produce something like 30 million seedlings every single year. And all of those trees are getting planted. And that Aurora is just one of, I think, 8 nurseries that Weyerhaeuser owns up and down the West Coast here on the I-5 corridor. So you start thinking about how many seeds or seedlings our local forest industry actually grows and produces. People don't understand how many trees the forest industry is planting on an annual basis. On a tree farm like the Weyerhaeuser Aberdeen tree farm, and that's just one private company out of a dozen or so that are operating in the Grays Harbor area. This is I'm going to get this wrong, but I think it's somewhere around like 350,000 acres, might be a little more than that. I know, because I'm friends with the silviculture foresters there, that they're typically planting anywhere, I would say maybe their average planting on just this tree farm is about 1.5 million seedlings each year. It can be as high as 2 million, and that's just one tree farm. So, what we're doing is just a tiny snapshot of something that's happening industry-wide. Well, I think one thing that a lot of folks don't necessarily understand about the forest industry is that not only do we plant, we're legally required to replant our harvest areas. We're also financially incentivized to do that, because that's our next crop. All the trees that we're harvesting today, when you see log dump trucks going down the road. We're not going in and cutting virgin forest anymore. Those days are gone. We've been there, we've done that, we've learned from the mistakes we made. All the trees that we're harvesting today are trees that we grew. You know, in this region, it's about 30 to 40 years to grow a tree from seedling size like that to harvest stage. And then as soon as we get that done, the following year, we're going back in and we're replanting all of those stands. Every single clear cut you see is planted. You just don't see that it's planted when you're driving by on the highway. You know, it takes 5 or 6 years for those trees to get large enough that you can see them and notice them. So I think oftentimes people, you know, they see the clear cut. It's a very obvious change in the forest landscape. It's easy to spot. And what you don't necessarily see, or you might not realize, is how many trees are in that. We'll typically plant, you know, average planting is around 350 to 430 trees per acre, depending on the spacing you're using. So if we do let's say a 100-acre harvest unit, well, we're going to plant over 40,000 trees in that. And that's just one unit. When you look across, you know, the western coast of Washington and Oregon, this is the heart of industrial timber company, and companies like Weyerhaeuser, Rainier, and Green Diamond, Sierra Pacific as well, they've been here for decades, some of them over a century. One of the cool legacies of this area is that Weyerhaeuser, back in around, I think it was the 1930s or 40s, they invented tree farming here. The Clemens Tree Farm, part of which is now actually part of the city of Montesano Forest, that was the first place that anyone ever planted a tree farm intentionally, just anywhere, with the purpose of planting trees to then later be harvested and turned into lumber. And that's a really cool legacy of this area. So, you know, when you drive into Aberdeen, there's 2 signs, and one says "Come as you are" and the other says "Timber Capital of the World." The sign in Montesano says "Home of the Tree Farm" because that's where the Clemens Tree Farm is, and that was the first commercially managed tree farm, and that really set the model for how all industrial forest land is managed today. The idea of cutting, replanting, and growing everything in this cycle of sustainability where we always have stands coming to maturity and being ready to harvest, and we're always planting something and getting the next crop of trees growing. So, you know, in many ways it's agriculture, but it's long-term agriculture. So that's why we call it tree farming. You know, we're growing a crop just like a farmer grows corn, but we're doing it on a 40-year cycle here instead of every single year. That's the only difference. Anything else you want to see up here?
It's really hot.
It is really hot in here. It's a greenhouse. It's supposed to be hot.